Let's talk about how some scandals end, because they don't collapse overnight. They build slowly, deliberately. And then one day you wake up, or it's later in the afternoon on a Friday, and there's a palace statement that sounds compassionate on the surface, but underneath, it's pure strategy or deflection. That's what just happened to Prince Andrew, or as he's now officially called, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Late last week, Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles had stripped Andrew of all royal titles, including Prince Andrew. His lease on Royal Lodge, the Windsor estate he had occupied for decades, was terminated. He was instructed to move to private accommodations. Effectively, it was a royal eviction. The palace calls it necessary, and they said it was done with the utmost sympathy for a certain group of people. Let's talk about that group, why it matters, and get to the real story, the one underneath those polished statements, and about how we got here. And when you line up the events, you see something that always appears in these types of crises, a pattern. It's not random. It's a system. Let's review a royal scandal that unfolded in 3 phases: the trigger, the timing, then the words. Let's go through each piece by piece. Hey there, welcome to the PR Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host, Molly McPherson, and this week, it's all about Prince Andrew. I know if you're on social media, if you're reading news accounts, there are so many articles about this. But I want to focus on one area that I don't see much content about, and that is looking at the statements themselves, backed up by the events that happened. Because scandals are rarely about a single moment. They're about accumulation, a slow build of stories and documents and outrage until silence becomes impossible. And for Prince Andrew, that trigger wasn't new. It was old. It's been lurking for a long time. And one of the things that brought him down was an email. That email that wouldn't go away. In January of this year, an old email resurfaced in the press. And it's the one showing that Andrew had stayed in contact with Jeffrey Epstein after the period he claimed their friendship ended. Now, in the 2019 BBC Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis, I watched it again on Friday afternoon. I took a quick lunch break. And next thing you know, on my lunch break, I am watching the entire program on Netflix called Scoop about the interview. It sucked a major portion out of my day, but I got sucked into it. And then after work that day, throughout the night, and then into the weekend, I watched that interview, the actual interview, over again because it is fascinating to see what happened and where, not necessarily where it all started, but the sheer arrogance that Prince Andrew thought that he could outrun or outsmart this crisis from that interview. I highly encourage you to watch that interview, but I'll be sure to add a few clips in here just in case you don't get around to it. But that is the interview where he claimed because of his time with the Royal Navy, he could no longer sweat. It was also the interview where he said very specifically that he was at a Pizza Express. Just for a second, listen to Emily Maitlis.
Why would you remember that so specifically? Why would you remember a Pizza Express birthday and being at home?
Because going to Pizza Express in Woking is an unusual thing for me to do. A very unusual thing for me to do. I've only been to Woking a couple of times, and I remember it weirdly distinctly. But as soon as somebody reminded me of it, I went, oh yes, I remember that. But I have no recollection of ever meeting or being in the company or the presence.
So all those sharp details that Andrew remembered, yet he was forgetting so many things about Epstein. He always had this look on his face like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean. But then when he had to remember those specifics to get around the lie, you've all been there, right? You know someone who's lying to your face. That's what they do. They always just double down on the details. Andrew had insisted that he had only seen Epstein once after his conviction and had cut ties in 2010. But that email, dated February 2011, told a different story. Prince Andrew wrote to Epstein, thanking him for their last meeting and saying, quote, "Let's play some more soon." That phrase, that became tabloid dynamite. It suggested ongoing familiarity long after the supposed break. And honestly, no one who has even a surface knowledge of Prince Andrew should be surprised. It was included in a set of Financial Conduct Authority court documents and had technically been public since early this year. But in October, British papers splashed it across their front pages. Why? Because now it landed in a different context. One of the most important parts of a crisis that a lot of people forget to look for, and that is the timing. The timing coincided with a wave of other unflattering headlines, all reinforcing the same story, that Andrew's version of events couldn't be trusted. Now, I just mentioned the Newsnight interview. Let's go back to that Newsnight interview because it's the bedrock of this entire crisis. So back in November 2019, the Duke of York sat down with BBC journalist Emily Maitlis to, quote, set the record straight. The goal was damage control. If you watch Scoop on Netflix, you know everything that was happening behind the scenes. The result, however, was reputation collapse. In the interview, Andrew denied ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, denied any sexual contact, saying he was home with his children after visiting, very specifically, Pizza Express, claimed a medical condition prevented him from sweating, contradicting Giuffre's description, and said staying with Epstein after his conviction was wrong. The interview was supposed to humanize him. Instead, it made him look delusional. Like, honestly, he thought that he was going to convince Maitlis, the UK, the rest of the world, everyone paying attention. Such a delusional, egocentric thought. But within 48 hours, his public duties were suspended. Within a week, sponsors and charities had cut ties with Prince Andrew. And by early 2020, the monarchy had quietly exiled him from public life. So when that 2011 email reappeared, showing continued contact, it just wasn't another headline. It directly undercut his only public defense. Then came the literary wave. In 2025, royal biographer Andrew Lowney published entitled The Rise and Fall of Prince Andrew, a deeply researched but scathing portrayal. It chronicled Prince Andrew's years of arrogance and questionable business deals and his behavior that was so off-kilter, planting him as a man shaped by privilege and detached from accountability. That along with his wife, Fergie, as well. Shortly after, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir hit shelves. The book revisits her experiences with Epstein and details Prince Andrew's alleged involvement, bringing the accusations back into the mainstream conversation. And a conversation, by the way, that is still swirling around President Trump. Both of these books were widely covered, reviewed, dissected. The effect wasn't new information necessarily, but it was the repetition of information. They made sure his name stayed active in the cycle of Epstein-related coverage. Even his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, got pulled back into the storm. Old correspondence surfaced showing she had privately maintained contact with Epstein as well, even after his conviction, thanking him for financial helps with debts. When that became public again in 2025, several of her charitable affiliations distanced themselves from Fergie, and that in turn reignited discussion of the couple's shared judgment or lack of it, even though they've been divorced since 1996. So by October of this year, the narrative had metastasized. It wasn't about a single act or even a single person. It was about the royal brand tolerating proximity to a predator. Now, across the Atlantic on these shores, U.S. lawmakers have been demanding full disclosure of the Epstein documents. Thousands of pages of sealed court filings. There are so many credible reports that Andrew's name appeared in flight manifests and guest lists for Epstein's private island and New York townhouse. British outlets began asking, would the monarchy survive another Epstein release? And at that point, the palace wasn't dealing with a rumor. They were dealing with an inevitability. This was a storm that wasn't going to go away. As one royal insider told The Times, off record, quote, there comes a point when silence becomes complicity. And that's when the PR machine from the royal family, from Buckingham Palace, switched on. Now let's talk about the 5 incidents that finally stacked up to trigger this renewed crisis. So 1, the email contradiction, that's proof that he lied. 2, it directly conflicted with something that he said on the Newsnight interview. That's a credibility disaster. 3, the books, it's the sustained narrative damage. 4, the Fergie connection, it's just the collateral op. Everything those two touch or any of their dealings are tainted. And 5, the Epstein document push, the political urgency on both sides of the Atlantic. Individually, one by one, survivable, but together they're catastrophic. That's the incident stack that creates the trigger that turns private embarrassment into an institutional crisis. And once the monarchy felt that heat, the next phase kicked in, and that's the timing. So often PR is about emotion, but when it comes to the royal family, it's not. It's about the sequencing. So when the pressure hits its peak, the palace doesn't react instinctively. If you think back to all the royal crises that have happened, Harry and Meghan, Princess Catherine, Kate Middleton with her cancer diagnosis, the hiding of it, the covering of it, and then the eventual reveal calibrates. The royal family, Buckingham Palace, they calibrate the moment to act. It's precisely the moment where they feel that doing so seems morally inevitable, but politically controlled. And that's what happened here. We have no idea knowing what's going on behind the scenes. People assume because it's the royal family that everything is proper, everything is right, everything is aboard. But if you watch any of the accounts of the royal family, if you watch The Crown on Netflix, if you watch Scoop, if you read, if you follow news accounts, now nobody really knows exactly what goes on behind the royal walls and behind closed doors. But collectively, when these things start to accumulate, you can see the patterns there and see how they operate. And certainly there was a structure to what happened here. Now, the first step was the soft landing. That happened a couple weeks ago on 17 October when Andrew released his own statement. I did a post on social media. I'll include a link in the show notes. It happened on a Friday, early afternoon. So that meant it was released late Friday, UK time. And I remember just hopping online real quick. I started filming before I even read the statement because I knew even in the first read, I would be able to glean what was happening there just from how the statement was written. And because it was from Prince Andrew, I could assume right off the bat, there wasn't going to be accountability. It was going to be deflection. There was going to be ego embedded in the words of the statement. And the statement delivered. This is what he wrote, quote, "In discussion with the king and my immediate and wider family, we have concluded the continued accusations about me distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family. I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to my family and country first. With His Majesty's agreement, we feel I must now go a step further. I will therefore no longer use my title or the honors which have been conferred upon me." But he also reiterates, "I vigorously deny the accusations against me." It reads like a voluntary resignation. In those words, with His Majesty's agreement. In other words, this is Prince Andrew deciding on his own that he is going to go a step further and decide to no longer use his title or honors which have been conferred upon me. It's more like a gesture where he's saying, I'm doing this for the good of the family. But make no mistake, that is stage 1 of the palace playbook, because there's no way that Prince Andrew, we don't even need to know him. Hey, by the way, did I meet Prince Andrew? I can't remember. Years ago, so this would have been 1998, I think. Prince Andrew, I was at a dinner reception with Prince Andrew on the Constitution in Boston. So at the time, this was my former husband, military. There was some military event, and he was on the boat. No, I didn't meet him, but I saw him because I thought if I met him, then I would have been curtsying. And honestly, why would he meet me? I was on a date. I wasn't even a military spouse. I was just on a date at that point. And I was probably had a few cocktails in me, but I definitely saw Prince Andrew. And now that we hear all this stuff about Prince Andrew, I wonder what he was doing in Boston. Who knows what was going on in Boston when he was visiting? But he's just not someone, because I remember watching him and knowing at that time, back in the late 90s, he was still known as the Randy Andy. Was he divorced from Frigga at that point? I believe so. When I saw him, gosh, now come to think of it, I'm thinking as I'm recording this, I wonder if Diana was alive. Because I feel like Diana would have been alive. It was right around the time. You know what? I bet I saw him right before Princess Diana died, as a matter of fact. Because I think I would have been paying attention far more to Prince Andrew, knowing that Princess Diana died. I'm sorry. Thank you for going along with me on this whole thing. It was definitely before Princess Diana died when he was on that boat in Boston. But anyway, the point is, he was always known as, carried himself in this rather arrogant way. And I just remember the buzz around him that time, that he was definitely that way. Now, 2 weeks later, after his statement, comes the hard landing. And that came out just a few days ago from this recording on 30 October. So just 13 days later, the king issued a formal statement. Technically, it was through Buckingham Palace. The statement said, quote, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and honors of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge has today provided him with legal protection to continue in residence. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him. Their Majesties wish to make clear that their thoughts and utmost sympathies have been and will remain with the victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. That was not a suggestion. It was an execution order, cloaked in royal courtesy. Within hours, the BBC, Guardian, Times, and AP all published the full text verbatim. So that uniformity alone tells you the palace had pre-cleared distribution. Now, if you look at all the other content out there and the royal content on social media, so many other theories as to who really chimed in on this statement. Was it Prince William who was pressuring the king to do this? People magazine assumed just from the language, discussing the victims of abuse, that Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine, Kate Middleton, that they had something to do with it. I don't know. I don't think it's quite as loosey-goosey. I think this was definitely driven by the king in support of everyone else. Now, removing the title prince is unprecedented in modern royal history. It effectively erases his identity as a working royal. Slightly different than Harry and Meghan, where they made the choices to leave. So that's why their situation is much different than what's happening to Andrew. And the change from Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, that's his legal surname, symbolizes a total reclassification from member of the firm to just a regular private citizen. So evicting him from the Royal Lodge just seals that transformation. So that property had been under long-term lease, which according to reports, Andrew did, I think I saw that he contributed $8 million towards renovations of that lodge, but really wasn't paying much of anything to live there. But living there gave Andrew certain legal protections, preventing the removal from that location. But by serving formal notice, the palace signaled it was willing to override those protections under royal prerogative. So in PR terms, that's substance. It's not just optics anymore. It's action. October 17th and October 30th announcements form what crisis managers like myself might call a two-step disassociation strategy. Step one is the voluntary withdrawal that lets the subject appear to act out of conscience. It reduces sympathy, backlash, preserves dignity. And then step two, it's the institutional enforcement. It follows up with formal action that cements the decision, framed as necessary rather than punitive. Perhaps they allowed Andrew his ego in that first statement, but they knew that the hammer was coming down in the second one. It's the strategy of emotional sequencing. People don't revolt against a process that feels inevitable. It's just easier to accept it that way. And that's why those 13 days matter. They weren't about hesitation. It was about conditioning public sentiment. At least that's my impression of it. I don't think that we had a random Andrew statement and then 2 weeks later, the palace decides that they have to go now. I think there was a lot of pressure there. It could have been a month later, but it was a part of a two-step strategy. And there is some precedent here. The palace has used similar pacing during the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936. It allowed him to announce his voluntary choice before formally removing his royal standing. You remember when he chose to be with his wife, Wallis, a divorce from the U.S. I believe she was from Baltimore. And they did it again after Princess Diana's 1995 Panorama interview, where she basically came out and made all of those statements about her marriage. Very shocking interview. But statements were there to manage tone. And it's not just about substance, it's how they're moving forward. And with Princess Diana, I think is where the royal family really learned about public opinion and how little they had. And King Charles, no doubt, remembers the time when he was Prince Charles with Princess Diana, how he lost the power of public opinion compared to his former wife. It feels as if he's learning those lessons. And that's why the choreography of control is so important now. The planning is better. One message softens, the next one seals. That's what happened to Andrew. It's that soft surrender, hard closure. Anything we see in the future, I think we're going to see it in this type of a pattern. They also learned their lesson with Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis. They got caught flat-footed on that. They tried to hide it. They tried to outsmart the press and the public, and they lost badly. And now it seems like they've really figured out how to control the messaging. Now let's look at the part that I didn't see a lot of content focus on, and that's the language. Because the palace doesn't speak like a celebrity or a family. It speaks like an institution. Every phrase in that October 30th statement from Buckingham Palace was engineered to balance compassion with control. In the opening, quote, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process. That phrase signals hierarchy. It positions the king not as a brother, but as the sovereign. The action isn't emotional, it's more administrative. The subtext is, this is a constitutional necessity. This is not a family punishment. It also reminds the audience that the king acts as protector of the institution, not protector of his brother. This line, quote, These censures are deemed necessary. This is bureaucratic detachment. It doesn't say, we have decided. It says, they are deemed. Passive voice removes ownership, making the act sound inevitable, as if duty itself required it. And that word necessary frames it as reluctant but unavoidable. It's the language of moral authority without emotional involvement. This line, quote, Their Majesties wish to make clear their sympathies remain with victims and survivors of any and all forms of abuse. That's institutional empathy, and something you do not often hear coming out of Buckingham Palace. And notice how it's phrased, not the victims in this case, but victims of any and all forms of abuse. It expands the sentiment beyond the specific scandal. It's a classic PR maneuver to avoid liability when signaling compassion. So in essence, the royal family, Buckingham Palace, is saying, we care about the issue, but we're not admitting association. They didn't focus on just the victims of Epstein. It's all victims. Next, quote, will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. This line does more than identify. It rebrands. It shifts public framing from Prince Andrew, his royal identity, to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a brand new private citizen. It's the verbal equivalent of removing a logo from a product line. Same person, but way different category. So when media outlets begin adopting the new name within hours, if you read the BBC or any article in The Guardian, it showed the coordination. That's not media guessing. That's the media following the palace guidance. The Wikipedia page wasn't updated yet. The royal website was not updated. But media accounts, they were. This line, a consistent one, quote, he continues to deny the allegations. This line is important because it protects the palace from appearing to confirm guilt. By explicitly stating that Andrew continues to deny, the monarchy avoids making a moral judgment. It distances the act, removing titles from underlying claims. So they can say, we acted out of duty, not because he's guilty. That phrasing protects both the integrity and the public optics. So in all the statements since 2022 involving this PR crisis, there is a linguistic rhythm. There's a formality. His Majesty is today initiated. There's a detachment. These censures are deemed necessary. There's an empathy buffer. Sympathies remain with victims. There's a neutralization. He continues to deny. There's an identity reset, will now be known as. That's not coincidence. It's now the new royal communication template. It's designed to sound honorable, not emotional, because in monarchy PR, emotion implies instability. Formality implies control. So if we were to put this all together, the fall of Prince Andrew was spontaneous from Andrew's point of view, but systematic when it comes from the palace. It was a managed descent structured around three principles: the trigger, the timing, the words. The trigger, it was the accumulation of scandal, the email, the Newsnight contradictions, the books, the memoir, the Fergie fallout, and the pressure from the Epstein documents. It creates this moral momentum that the palace could no longer ignore. Then the timing had that two-step rollout: voluntary withdrawal on 17 October, then formal removal on 30 October. It was deliberate, and it gave the illusion of choice before the enforcement, but it was definitely the enforcement and the words. The final statement turned condemnation into formality. It was controlled, it was careful, and it was choreographed. So by the time the announcement hit the wires, public outrage had already peaked. And the palace didn't chase the narrative. It waited for it in the timing. There was a lot of pressure. There was going to be political pressure to move this along with Andrew. They were going to find more legal ways to make this move, more political ways to make this move. That's why the palace had to step up and then moved in a way that it felt inevitable and not impulsive. And that's now the new royal PR playbook. It's not about crisis response. It's about reputation choreography. And I think this signals the era of Prince William, eventually King William. It's going to be more choreographed. So next time you hear a royal statement that sounds oddly gentle, incredibly formal, yet impossibly final, remember, behind every word, there's a team calculating tone, timing, and impact. Because in the monarchy, survival isn't just about bloodline. It's about brand discipline. And if I were Harry and Meghan, oh my goodness. Now, you can't even begin to compare them with the Prince Andrew. You can't even begin. But they are a PR thorn in the side of Buckingham Palace, of the royal family. This hard drop of Prince Andrew, I bet, is rattling Harry. Meghan and Harry showing all this enthusiasm about the Dodgers. Meghan's from Los Angeles. Okay, we're with you there. You can be bandwagon. That's fine. We have no idea that you like sports at all, much less baseball. But the Dodgers are in the World Series again. I don't remember a lot of press the last time the Dodgers won the World Series. But okay, I get it. But then you're bringing Harry, and baseball is not UK. They play, NFL plays over there, but baseball is American. That is apple pie American. That is not UK. So to bring Harry in there and to go to the game, and also they said that I saw a clip that said that they had 12 bodyguards or 11 bodyguards bringing them into Dodger Stadium. And then I saw another post where Meghan is cheering because they're watching it and Harry's just there. Yeah, that didn't work. And I'm not saying this as a hater for Meghan and Harry at all. I did a live last week where I was explaining I don't hate on them, and I don't do press about Meghan Markle. I will not do press about Meghan Markle and Harry anymore. As a matter of fact, I agreed to my last interview like 2 weeks ago, and then I canceled it. I said, I'm not going to do it. And the reporter had already asked the questions, but I already decided ahead of time because all the questions about Meghan Markle, they always have a negative tone to them, which I get because they want clicks. And I'm not going to blame the reporter. The editor could have told her to write that way. But Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, they get clicks. So, of course, people are going to write about them. And you're going to get more clicks if it's negative. But these questions that I received wanted me to think for Meghan, like answer the question of why Meghan's doing this or that. And this was about Fashion Week in Paris. Now, how would I have any opinion whatsoever on what Meghan is doing? Reputation is one thing, but to think and assume why she's making this moves, I don't care. And not to mention that has nothing to do with me. But I also decided I don't want to do press about them anymore. I'm not going to. Now, I'll still talk about them because I'm fascinated. watching them and their moves because they react to things that happen with the royal family. So I bet you anything, they are shaking in their boots. So we'll see down the road about that one. All right, everyone. That's all for this week on the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.